So what happens when a state decides to do something, well, something that literally no one has ever done before? Back in 2012, Colorado took a massive leap into the unknown, and believe me, the whole world was watching.
On November 6th of that year, voters in Colorado passed something called Amendment 64. And this wasn't just a big deal for the state, it was a first for the entire United States, and actually a first for the whole world. They were about to write the playbook on what legal, recreational cannabis could look like. But as the governor at the time, John Hickenlooper, wisely warned, it wasn't time to break out the snacks just yet. You see, the thing is, federal law still considered marijuana an illegal drug. So turning a vote into a real, functioning reality, that was going to be a huge, complicated challenge. The vote was really just the beginning.
So how did they go from a simple yes on the ballot to a full-blown billion-dollar industry? Let's unpack that whole journey, and we'll start with the promises that got them there in the first place.
Okay, first things first. We have to understand what voters were actually hoping for when they cast their ballots. What was the big promise of legalization anyway?
This map tells a really fascinating story about that vote. You can see from all the green that support was pretty widespread. This wasn't just some niche issue, and the stakes were incredibly high. They weren't just passing some new law, they were amending the state constitution itself.
And the final numbers? They were decisive. Over 1.3 million people in Colorado voted yes. That gave the amendment a clear majority with over 55% of the vote. I mean, that is a strong mandate for change.
So, what was the sales pitch? Well, the campaign for Amendment 64 painted a pretty compelling picture. They talked about generating new tax money for schools, allowing police to focus on more serious, violent crime, putting an end to the criminal black market, and, of course, a big boost for personal freedom. It was a really powerful combination of promises.
So, with the votes counted, how did that vision translate into actual rules? Let's take a look at the blueprint for what legal was supposed to be.
The amendment basically broke down into two main parts. For your personal use, if you were 21 or over, you could possess up to an ounce and grow a few plants at home. Pretty straightforward. Then there was the business side of things. The state would create a whole system to license and regulate commercial cultivation, manufacturing, and the retail stores. You know, a lot like it already does for alcohol.
It took more than a year of drafting regulations and setting the whole system up. But then, the promise became a reality. On January 1st, 2014, the first licensed retail shops, just like this one in Denver, opened their doors to the public. The Great Colorado Experiment was officially underway.
But here's the thing about rolling out a first-of-its-kind policy. It's never simple. The nice, clean blueprint for legalization quickly ran into the messy reality of actually putting it into practice. And that revealed some major complications nobody saw coming.
You'd think that a statewide yes vote would mean that dispensaries would just pop up in every town that voted for it, right? Well, not exactly.
And this is where we see one of the biggest wrinkles in the law. See, buried in Amendment 64 was something called a local option clause. And this gave individual city and county governments the power to just ban retail sales, even if their own residents had voted yes.
And a lot of local governments took that option. I mean, as this chart shows, by 2016, a whole patchwork of bans had popped up. Even Colorado Springs, the state's second-largest city, decided to opt out. This created a weird situation where legal in Colorado didn't mean available everywhere, which really complicated that simple yes vote.
This patchwork of local bans and other rules, like purchase limits, definitely drew criticism. From a libertarian point of view, like the one voiced by people like Jesse Ventura, the argument was pretty simple. If something is truly legal, why are we regulating it so much more heavily than alcohol or tobacco? It's a really fundamental question about what legal should actually mean in practice.
So after the dust settled, what were the tangible results? Let's dig into the two things that always seem to follow major policy changes like this: the money and the debate.
On the financial side, the results were just staggering. In the very first year of sales, the state collected $44 million in recreational marijuana taxes. Just 1 year later, that number tripled to $135 million. The promise of new revenue? Yeah, they definitely delivered on that one. And what about that promise to fund schools? Well, in 2015 alone, $35 million of that tax money was sent specifically to public school construction projects. This showed voters that the money was actually going where supporters said it would.
So where did all this money come from? The engine behind it was a new tax structure called Proposition AA. It basically layered a 15% excise tax and a special state sales tax on top of the existing taxes, and that created this powerful new revenue stream for the state.
But this tax plan wasn't universally loved, not even by the people who supported legalization. The Colorado chapter of NORML, a major pro-legalization group, actually opposed it. They argued that if you tax marijuana too heavily, you could make the legal prices so high that you fail to get rid of the very black market you were trying to replace.
And it's so important to see all of this in a broader context. The debate in Colorado wasn't happening in a bubble. As this graph shows, it's part of a much larger, much more urgent national conversation we're having about drug policy, especially as deaths from drug overdoses continue to rise.
Ultimately, what Colorado pioneered was so much more than just a new law. It was the beginning of a nationwide debate that really forces us to ask a more complicated question. It's not just about whether marijuana should be legal. It's about what legal really looks like in practice, what restrictions are reasonable, what tax rate is fair, and how do we balance personal freedom with public safety. These are the questions that every single state that follows is going to have to answer.